I saw the governor of Arkansas said, "My kids keep me humble." Unfortunately, Kamala Harris doesn't have anything keeping her humble. How did that make you feel?
I don't think she understands that there are a whole lot of women out here who, one, are not aspiring to be humble. Family comes in many forms, and I think that increasingly, all of us understand that, this is not the 1950s anymore.
Well, this is certainly not the 1950s anymore. That was the sitting Vice President of the United States on the Call Her Daddy podcast, which I found, Jake, I listened to all of it, to be the most substantive interview I've heard with a major party presidential candidate in a long time.
Really?
It was a really good interview.
Wow.
They talked a lot about issues relating to maternal mortality and to childcare and, of course, to issues surrounding abortion rights. But that's not the only interview that Harris is doing. We've got a couple selected here of the Call Her Daddy podcast. She's going back on The View tomorrow. She's on 60 Minutes on a primetime special as soon as this show is done. So keep watching this show and then go watch 60 Minutes special after this. And she'll be on my personal favorite, The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, tomorrow night. What do you think about all these interviews that Harris is finally doing?
I think it's pretty interesting. I think it's almost like she heard the calls, right? A lot of people a few weeks ago were saying Kamala Harris hasn't done interviews. She doesn't sit down. She doesn't get in front of a camera. She doesn't lay out her policies, although they did that on her website. And I think she kind of heard it. And now she's doing it her way. It's not the traditional media blitz, right?
Yeah.
But we've never seen a president on, or a sitting vice president on a podcast called Call Her Daddy. Now, of course, Call Her Daddy has been around for a good amount of time now. It used to be Barstool. Maybe Dave Portnoy was wrong about it because now Alex Cooper has got Kamala Harris sitting down there.
Right.
I don't think Portnoy has had a presidential candidate sit down, but enough.
He talked to Trump in the Oval Office.
He did
in 2020, so he did technically have that.
But you see this whole new media thing going on. But I think Kamala Harris is just kind of doing it her own way, right? Yeah. There is some hard-hitting interviews. We have 60 Minutes. That might be the hardest hitting of interviews. And then we have stuff like this, which I think is interesting because I think a lot of people are saying she might be preaching to the choir, right? Where it's like a lot of the Call Her Daddy listeners might be people who are already voting for Vice President Harris, but I think what she might be doing is just motivating them more, making sure they get up off the couch and they go vote. And I think that's something Trump has done with a couple of these appearances too. I mean, he was on with Theo Von like a few weeks ago.
And we talked about the manosphere, and now she's doing, maybe it was the womanosphere? What are we calling these string of interviews? I'm interested, this primetime special tonight on CBS for 60 Minutes. I guess we're not. On 60 Minutes, Trump dodged a 60 Minutes interview, saying that he wanted an apology from 4 years ago when he stalked out of the interview with Leslie Stahl. Do you think Trump is missing an opportunity to do tougher interviews? He's only been going to friendly folks like on Fox News.
I think he could be. I think Trump often struggles when he does tougher interviews. You mentioned he walked out of that interview back in 2020.
Yeah.
He's had some notorious moments where he really struggles in interviews, and he doesn't come off as relatable, right? Trump is a very macho person. A lot of it is going to be about himself. When somebody pushes him on that, he doesn't love that, and he gets very, very defensive. And I don't think that's something that people love seeing in interviews. That's something that people criticize Vice President Harris about when she was on with Lester Holt a few years ago. And people pointed to that interview and said, here's why she's not doing all these sit-down serious interviews. And I think she kind of heard the calls and decided that she would go do it. I don't know if Trump would benefit from it. I know that he's done some sit-down interviews with local stations in Pennsylvania. I know Vice President Harris has done that as well. I think that almost might be a better strategy to really target those swing voters. But I don't know if Trump would really benefit.
They're big fans of local news. I'm a big local news guy.
I know you're a big local news guy.
Huge.
Remember when I called you Carrie Lake last week?
You did. Do we need to bring that up a second time? Is that the second time we're going to bring that up in the show? I'm interested because there was an A1 story in the New York Times this Sunday about how Donald Trump seems to be slipping at his recent rallies, talking about how concerns of age that were once there for President Biden before he dropped out of the race are now happening for Donald Trump. They even had an analysis that said that he was speaking at about a fourth grader's level. Finally, before we go, do you think that Donald Trump is maybe too old to be the president? Do you think voters are going to have concerns about that?
He would be the oldest elected president ever, so I think that's a legitimate concern for Americans. I think one of my favorite flips was when Biden dropped out because of age concerns, and immediately Democrats flipped to saying, oh, well, now Trump is the old one.
Now Trump is too old.
So that's all the time we have for you today on this episode of Talking Points. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Citrus TV News and like us on Facebook. I'm Jake Morel.
And I'm Luke Radel. Have a great night and go watch 60 Minutes.